My name is David Daniel Ball, and these are the headlines for Sunday, the 22nd of February, 2009. Australia unites to farewell Victorian bushfire victims. US officials outraged at UN over Hamas letter to Obama. Aussie author back on home soil after 6-month nightmare. Aussie soldiers too fat to fight. Rose Meadow Estates $20 million renovation rescue. Pope to canonize 10 new saints, Mary MacKillop still in line. Australian missing at Japanese ski resort. Doctors may have used octuplets mum to boost fertility clinic stats. Iraq reopens Abu Ghraib prison. Model announces own death on Facebook. And parents racked with guilt after daughter dies of dentist phobia. And in comments, from Piers Akerman, Wrangle exposes Turnbull weaknesses. Opposition leader Malcolm Turnbull has been given a wake-up call he cannot afford to ignore. Well read, Piers, but I'm a little hesitant about ascribing fault to Liberal members on any of these issues. It is true that these issues, or some similar, could derail an election campaign. However, the threat is overstated. There was a perception prior to the last election that fair press deserted the Libs on issues such as misinformation and election pamphlets and leadership succession. In fact, inflations will always be overriding, so long as they override. Turnbull is not perfect. However, he would make a fine Prime Minister. To say that he is making experience mistakes is to ignore the fact that anyone can. But Turnbull can learn from them, whereas the ALP never did in opposition. And Australia is paying a high price now because the ALP never reformed in opposition. Costello could be a stumbling block, but then Costello will probably just be an effective parliamentary performer who was the greatest treasurer in Australia's history. There is no need to start at shadows. The Liberal Party can adjust itself as it did this week. Bishop had not made a mistake, despite press-driven perception. The truth is, I don't really care who is Liberal Prime Minister. I don't think the ALP have anyone capable of the job. And from Tim Blair, point made. An unusually direct opening paragraph, the millions of well-intentioned Australians turning off light bulbs, installing insulation in their ceilings, and solar panels on their roofs, cycling to work or buying low-emission cars are wasting time and money. It also has the added feature of being accurate. He's fired up. Warming his zombie, James Hansen rouses anti-coal forces for a march of somnolence upon the US Capitol. Green ships stormed. The law may be upheld at last. Australian Federal Police have raided anti-whaling flagship the Steve Irwin, seizing records and videos that could help Japan to prosecute the activist Sea Shepherd group. An armed squad seized 157 of Discovery Channel's raw videos and navigational records from the ship in Hobart. The videos show the Sea Shepherd's clashes with Japanese whalers and may be given to the Japanese government. A federal agent said yesterday's raid resulted from a formal referral from Japanese authorities and that police were undertaking preliminary inquiries into this summer's Southern Ocean confrontation. This age report was written by the paper's pro-Sea Shepherd correspondent Andrew Darby, who writes, true to form, as follows: ships collided and objects were thrown between the vessels as the anti-whaling group tried to disrupt the Japanese fleet's operations in the Ross Sea. Ships simply collided mysteriously, and objects were thrown by hands unidentified. Gee, such a puzzle it is, trying to work out who might in fact have questions to answer. Why did we fail to keep them cool? What kills is not so much the heat, but the failure to keep the frail cool. By not building a 21st century power supply, for instance. January's brutal heatwave may have killed 100 Melburnians and more than 200 people across the southeastern Australia, an invisible tragedy now the subject of investigations by the Department of Human Services and the Coroner's Office. Mr. Holman said heatwave's impact was sharpened by the loss of power and therefore lack of air conditioning in parts of the state, and concerned that some hospitals would have to be evacuated. The deaths of people because of our inadequate electricity infrastructure must be invented because I suspect it's a scandal. And for warming alarmists, a reminder that cold is the real killer, even when compared with the highest Melbourne temperatures in 150 years. Peter Hunter, Alfred Heath's director of aged care and rehabilitation, said demand during the heat wave was as high as during the winter peak. Blackmail and Wilders banning. Mark Stein says Britain's banning of Dutch MP Geert Wilders confirms what it pretended to deny. Among the growing population of Yorkshire's Pakistanis is a fellow called Lord Ahmed, a Muslim member of Parliament. He threatened to bring a force of 10,000 Muslims to lay siege to the House of Lords if it went ahead with an event at which the Dutch parliamentarian Geert Wilders would have introduced a screening of his controversial film Fitna. Britain's Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, reacted to this by declaring Wilders persona non grata and having him arrested and returned to the Netherlands. Smith is best known for an inspired change of terminology. Last year, she announced that henceforth Muslim terrorism, an unhelpful phrase, would be reclassified as anti-Islamic activity. Seriously. The logic being that Muslims blowing stuff up tends not to do much for Islam's reputation. That is, it's not an anti-Islamic activity in the same sense that Pearl Harbor was an anti-Japanese activity. Anyways, Geert Wilders' short film is a compilation video of footage from recent Muslim terrorist atrocities. Anti-Islamic activities, accompanied by the relevant chapter and verse from the Quran. Jackie Smith banned the filmmaker on public order grounds. In other words, the government's fear that Lord Ahmed might do what he said about a 10,000-strong mob besieging the Palace of Westminster. You might conceivably get the impression from Wilders' movie that many Muslims are irrational and violent types. It's best to steer well clear of. But if you didn't, Jackie Smith pretty much confirmed it. We can't have chaps saying Muslims are violent because they go smash the place up. Yes, we can't. The change you can believe in turns out to be a change for the worse. The election marked a turning point. Investors look forward to the economic policies crafted by Democrats in Congress and the White House. More pointedly, they want a decisive, well-crafted action on the banking crisis. Hence, the Dow soared 6.5% November 21 on news that Timothy Geithner, the highly respected head of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, was Obama's pick for Treasury Secretary. Yet from November the 4th, 2008 through February the 12th, 2009, the Dow Jones Index overall fell 18%, a larger drop than during the September-October plunge. In January, when Obama's plan, promising for greater deficits than two much smaller emergency stimulus plans signed by President George W. Bush in 2008, was unveiled, the market tanked, the worst January performance in 113 years. Watch the Dow sink since Obama was sworn in. And an update, you mean Obama was just playing opportunist politics before when he didn't have the responsibility for safeguarding U.S. lives? U.S. President Barack Obama's administration has sided with predecessor George W. Bush on the rights of detainees at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, saying they cannot challenge their detention in U.S. courts. Cue all the protests against Obama that were launched against Bush. And from John Tantillo, the Democratic brand is in trouble and it doesn't even know it yet. Too much pride in oneself or in any accomplishment inevitably leads to a fall, and there's an even bigger fall coming if you're proud for all the wrong reasons, especially when those reasons include mistakenly thinking that someone else's accomplishments are your own. This is the biggest problem facing the Democratic brand today, taking credit for President Obama's success. That street runs only one way. The Democrats are not Teflon like Obama is.